So why Latreuo? Why is it that we've talked about restructuring, redesigning a sanctuary, and we've given, criticism to certain things? Not that it's entirely negative, but we're challenging this traditional view of worship. And why would we want to do that? Well, I think it's important to separate the two, to separate Latreuo out from other aspects of worship. If you think of it in the context of praise and worship, praise is thanking God for what He's done for you. And so a lot of times we come to a worship service and we call it worship, but in reality it's praise. And it's not that praise is bad, but it's different than worship. Praise is thanking God for what He's done, but worship is thanking God for who He is. If you compare that to a natural relationship that we have, say with a spouse or with a friend, you praise them when they do something nice for you. You brought me lunch, you made me this thing, you did this thing for me. So thank you for that. I'm appreciative of that. But when you have like that real companionship, that real love, sometimes you just love someone for who they are. You love a spouse, and not because of anything they do for you, but because that's your spouse. That's the same kind of comparison that you have with Latreuo. So that's why we separate these two things. That's why we do that. The why of Latreuo is that you're having an internal look at your own motivations for worship to Christ. It's that you're evaluating yourself and saying, am I really coming before God with the purest of intentions? Am I coming to God to thank Him for what He does? Or am I coming to thank Him for who He is? If the majority of your worship is spawned out of what God has done for you, well, what if God doesn't do something for you? What if He doesn't answer your need? What if He doesn't answer your call? What if you don't get the request that you've made? Are you going to stop worshiping God? And so that's why we would say, when there's a why to Latreuo, it's because it's not dependent on if God does anything. It's only dependent on who He is. It's only dependent on your attitude that says, God, if you never meet my need, if you never pick me up out of the miry clay, if you never heal me or rescue me from this situation, I'm still going to serve you. I'm still going to worship you for who you are, because you've already saved me. You've already done enough. So my worship is no longer dependent on an action that God gives me. My worship is dependent out of what's inside my heart. If you consider the component of grace and how messy grace is, how broad grace is, it is unfair, and it doesn't always make sense. It's messy a lot of times. It can be ugly. Why is it that this idea of grace is nothing that I can achieve? It's nothing that I can do to receive grace. It just already is. And it already was whenever Jesus paid for that on the cross for us. If grace can't be explained, then how can we expect to fully explain Latreuo? Latreuo is going to be messy. It's going to be unexplainable at times. It's going to be the unedited version of your worship. It's going to be bad vocals sometimes. It's going to be inadequate sound systems. It's going to be inadequate people who are trying to serve an adequate God. And it's going to be hard to put into terms what that looks like. But that's why it's important when we talk about Latreuo to consider the heart element of this. Because if your heart is right, then the performance of it, the explanation of it does not have to be right. It doesn't have to be perfect. And the only person who can really judge that is God, is the person that you're worshiping too. So we don't worship with Latreuo in our heart and say, I'm doing this in the best possible way and everything has to be done right, where a worship service has to be done right. And by doing it right, it means we've checked all the boxes for our worship. There aren't boxes to check in Latreuo worship. There's just the one box, and that's the condition of your heart. When you consider how messy the totality of your worship is, it's probably because it's pouring out of your heart in all the right ways. That's what God cares about. John 4 talks about how the day is coming where God will be looking for the true worshipers. and the true worshipers who worship him in spirit and in truth. That doesn't mean that you've got it all down right. It just means that the goodness that's inside of you is what's coming out. Not this pharisaical view of what worship is supposed to be, but the way that it comes out in you. That's true worship. That's the heart of worship. That's Latreuo.